very good evening, one and all. This is Bridgie, and I'm your host for today's panel discussion. It's with great pleasure that I welcome all our eminent panelists, moderator, and you all, our dear viewers. It has been 20 glorious years since the inception of INAP, and it's a matter of great pride and time of celebration for every INAPian. I'm pretty sure that INAP would have been buzzing with all the grand events, if not for these unprecedented times. But think about it. We are all doers, and we always come up with a way. It's while thinking on those lines, we felt, why not look into something that runs close to our technical space? That is how we came up with the idea of panel discussion on the topic, transforming software development for a changing world. We know that businesses around the world have seen accelerating changes in the last decade, be it in terms of their operating environment, technologies deployed, or consumer expectations. Some of these changes have been gradual, whereas others, such as the present global pandemic, are more of a shock that needs an immediate response. One of the most potent tools that businesses have at their disposal to enhance their resilience and competitiveness is technology. Today, most successful businesses are responding to these challenges by leveraging technology. If we think from the perspective of technology providers, however, this means that there is a significant pressure to provide a broad repertoire of technology options, platforms, and services. In this panel discussion, we examine the future of technology solutions development and the changes likely therein. Let's begin. It's a great privilege for me to introduce our moderator for today's panel discussion, Mr. Satish Babu, who is a well-known proponent of open source software, a volunteer leader in multiple international technology organizations, including IEEE, ICANN, and Internet Society, and also the founding partner of INAP. During his sabbatical from INAP, he worked as the founder director of the International Center for Free and Open Source Software of the Government of Kerala. He is a fellow and past president of the Computer Society of India. Welcome, Satish. Thanks for joining us today. I now pass the baton to Satish, who would provide more insight into the topic and also introduce our panelists. Satish, please.
Thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. I'm Satish, and I'd like to first of all welcome everyone, especially the speakers who are coming from very different time zones. And I apologize for the trouble that it must have taken all of you to join us today at this particular time. This panel discussion, as has been pointed out, is being organized as part of our 20th anniversary celebrations. And apart from the Zoom room, we have most of the participants on the YouTube channel. And the theme has also been mentioned. It's transforming software development for a changing world. When we were planning this session, the team that was involved in the planning, we took a look at the last 20 years or so of software development. Now, for most of us, codesmiths, software development or coding is a science, art, and craft. When I started programming about 35 years back, the world and computers were far simpler. Of course, there were innovations. For example, we had a major move in structured programming and later into object-oriented programming. But each of these innovations took almost a decade to be disseminated and propagated. Today, of course, the situation is vastly different. For most part of the last decade, we have seen that innovation is continuous and the pace is ever accelerating. Now, we talk about common technologies like AI/ML in the context of innovation, but there are actually many, many more. Some of them not so visible, and Anil will be kind of talking to us shortly about some of these major movers that's actually transforming the world around us. Now, innovations are feeding off of each other, enriching each other, and resulting in emergent properties. Now, these emergent properties, by definition, were not designed, but they just arise spontaneously through complex interactions among the various technology artifacts. Now, this is happening all the time. And as far as users and consumers are concerned, there's a lot of excitement because these innovations permit possibilities that were not possible earlier. For instance, 5G is a technology platform that provides very low latency networking. Now, this very low latency networking provides actually a whole class of applications, ranging perhaps from precise telesurgery to self-driving fleets of vehicles that were simply not possible earlier in the scheme of things. So these are actually transformational changes. And also to mention the example of the global pandemic, there have been very significant changes, and these are actually, kind of heralding the changes that are coming in future. For example, the changes in retail and even things like robotic deliveries, the digital and contactless payments, remote work, distance learning, telehealth, the changing online entertainment, and the supply chain 4.0, which is basically we discovered during the pandemic that most of our just-in-time supply chain simply broke down. We didn't have inventories to buffer these disruptions. So complete chains just broke down. Now, the movement to hyperlocal is happening right now. So we don't want long-distance, just-in-time supply chains anymore. We want local and hyperlocal supply chains where possible. So these are all kind of changes that are happening, and most of these are technology-driven. Also, we see that post-COVID, the digital infrastructure will be as important as roads and bridges and railroads and airports, because we have seen that the digital technologies is actually what has sustained us through, and even for many of us has enabled us to thrive and overcome and increase our resilience as a company or as an industry. Now, for developers, the situation is slightly different. It actually raises formidable challenges, but simultaneously opens up opportunities. We also note that in the leading edge technologies, regulatory regimes have fallen behind, with the lags often increasing. For example, you have AI, ML, or self-driving cars, and the regulations have to catch up. Everything from insurance to the penal laws have to catch up with these things. And given the kind of frenetic pace, this is often not possible, and the gap is widening. We also have things like ethical challenges that come up in the context of the increasing algorithmization that results in invisible biases, whether it's gender or race-related or any other kind of biases. So this is actually a really vast topic, and this panel we have brought together a bunch of very eminent experts who are actually going to speak from their own perspectives and also from a general perspective. And at this point, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. First, we have Anil. Anil is the CTO of InApp, and he has over 30 years of experience. As a CTO, he heads the technological management organization, TMO, and advises project teams on various technology options and choices. He is the technology man of InApp. He's an alumnus of the College of Engineering, Trivandrum, and has worked in several companies, including Fisher in Technopark. And currently, he is looking at his interests include cloud computing, spatial computing, deep neural networks, and big data architectures. And of course, microservices, which he has not mentioned here, but I'm sure that's one of the areas. Next, we have Varghese Cherin, who's the head of technology services of UST Global, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, local company, Kerala-based company. Varghese is an enterprise architect with over 25 years of experience in architecting, managing, and implementing solutions over a multitude of technologies. He is currently the head of technology services at UST Global, looking at the ADM service line. And he is responsible for defining services that UST takes to the market in the ADM space across the globe, as well as defining the accelerators that make these services unique. Varghese is also an alumnus of CET Trivandrum, and he has been working with many of us as a senior member of IEEE. and he's currently the chair of Promotion of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which is a special interest group under the sphere of Kerala. And he's also a mentor to startups at the Kerala Startup Mission. I'd like to welcome and introduce Brandon Burris, who's the CTO of Z5 Inventory. He's a proven entrepreneur and technology leader who over the past 15 years has been involved with or founded and built several software startups in the Austin area. And his most recent company developed patented intelligence gathering software for worldwide deployments, including for the Department of Defense, with active operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, Brandon is actively leading the development of new technologies and innovations for another Austin-based startup in the healthcare industry, bringing together big data science practices, and event-based microservice architectures and AI ML into a single integrated platform designed to proactively predict and eliminate expired and overstocked inventory and medical supplies. We next have Manjula Muthukrishnan, who is the Managing Director of Avalara India. Manjula has over 25 years of experience in information technology and digital transformation and carries extensive global business management experience. She brings a unique combination of experience in business management, engineering, consulting, pre-sales, and training. Before joining Avalara, she served leadership roles at renowned organizations like Infosys, HSBC, and Socion Advisors. Manjula is also a graduate from the College of Engineering, Trivandrum, and a post-graduation with a Master of Science in Software Systems from the very reputed Birla Institute of Technology and Science. And our next speaker is Ray Divakar, Vice President, Innovation and Platform Strategy of Gordian. Ray is the Vice President of Innovation and Platform Strategy of Gordian, leading efforts to drive differentiated solutions leveraging emerging technologies. He's a serial entrepreneur, having built 3 software startups from ground up to successful exits. He has more than 20 years of experience designing and developing software in AI, ML, big data, semantic data management, and encryption. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Osmania University, as well as a master's degree in architecture from Washington State University. So I'd like to welcome, warm welcome to all our speakers who have joined us from different parts of the world. And at this point, I'd like to briefly tell you how we have planned this session. We have Anil, who will be sharing his slide deck with us in about 12 minutes. After which each of the panelists will speak for 10 minutes each, and then we will open up the floor for questions from the Zoom and YouTube rooms, and we'll have the panelists respond to them. And finally, just before closing, we will have a 1-minute closing statement from each panelist, with which we will close the session. So I hope that we will the audience, which is a large community of INAP's team, they will benefit from these discussions, and I now call upon Anil to make his presentation.
Thank you, Satish. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. So the scope of the topic is so vast, like Satish mentioned. So I hope to go through my slide deck in the allotted 12 minutes. So welcome one and all the panelists and all the audience across the globe. So I hope everyone is aware of the data explosion that's been happening around us in the recent past. New discoveries like autonomous cars, drones, and augmented reality glasses have added to this data explosion. According to statistics, every 5 years, data grows 10 times. What this actually means is that as software developers, to ensure that your application survives a 10-year period, your infrastructure should be able to handle 100 times more data than what it does today. Also important is the quality of data, because decision makers derive their insights from this data, and a wrong strategy could result from incorrect or bad quality data. Well, the explosion of data is a cause as well as an effect, isn't it? Companies started realizing that there is going to be a huge market for infrastructure as a service where you provide everything from networking to storage to servers to virtualization. So that was the first shift towards cloud computing, where people migrated from their on-premise systems to infrastructure as a service. Companies like Rackspace fell into this category of providing infrastructure as a service. Then infrastructure as a service transformed to platform as a service and subsequently to software as a service, where right from networking all the way to the application is managed in the cloud. As you know, Amazon holds the lead there, closely followed by Microsoft, Google, and others. Apart from the general end user SaaS applications that are hosted in the cloud, companies have been building data warehouses and business intelligence repositories from data stored in their transactional databases through what are called ETL processes to get insights into the data that can then be visualized. However, of late, there has been an emerging trend wherein companies are trying to tap into a lot of other data sources like logs, IoT devices, social media, and so on. And traditional ETL processes cannot be used here because of the volume, the variety, veracity, and velocity, the 4 V's of the data, where you need distributed data platforms and parallelization of processing to go with it. Typically, what you do is to have a process for ingesting the raw data into a distributed data store and have various processes analyze them using AI, ML, full text search, or just plain query. The goal is to be able to give a structure to some of the raw data for later search and querying purposes. A new concept for storing the raw data after ingestion and subsequently executing queries is the data lake, where they're stored as distributed files. There are quite a few examples like the Azure Data Lake, the open source data lake, Delta Lake that Databricks open sourced to the community, which is used in conjunction with Apache Spark. And AWS also has a data lake architecture built on top of S3 files. Security. One of the major concerns that customers have about the cloud is, of course, security. Needless to state that security on the cloud is also a shared responsibility. In the graphic that you see, you can see that the black colored boxes represent the cloud vendor responsibilities, whereas the white boxes represent the client's responsibilities. Apart from providing the basic foundational services like compute, storage, network, and database, cloud vendors also provide logical network segmentation. For example, AWS has these VPCs, the perimeter security services, web application firewalls that prevents the common attacks like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, DDoS attacks, and so on. So it's up to the software developers to use the best practices when it comes to security, like doing proper validations, adhering to the principle of least privilege, multi-tenancy, data isolation, access management, and so on. And to some extent, the frameworks that they use for development help them achieve it, but then they have to be cognizant of this and always think of this shared responsibility between the cloud vendor and the application developer. Of course, data privacy is as important, especially during COVID times when people are working remotely, is a big issue. When Google was fined 50 million euros for violating GDPR, it sent shockwaves across companies worldwide. They were doing behavioral checks on people for presenting the ads, but then they were not seeking their approval. Essentially, GDPR deals with a bunch of user rights, which is shown in the diagram on the left. And on the right side, you can see how companies have been forced to build data privacy manager components into their CRM software that allowed a lead or a contact to exercise these GDPR rights, such as the right to be forgotten, for example. Coming to environmental effects, the picture to the left shows the benefits of cloud computing to the environment in terms of lower energy costs, reduced e-waste, and so on. However, I'm sure that a vast majority of software developers out there may not have thought about the detrimental effects of their work to the environment. Apparently, the equivalent carbon footprint of training a BERT natural language processing model from scratch is about 5 times that of a car in the US during its entire lifetime. That gives you a perspective about how much power these AI models consumes today during training, especially in comparison to a human brain. You can imagine how much power it needs. Of course, it needs to be stated that the CPU cycles consumed is only during the training and not when the same model is used for prediction. We mentioned the AI ML briefly as part of the big data pipeline, where ML models could enhance the incoming data by giving a structure to the non-structured data. One example is the named entity recognition application of ML. As you see in the figure, a loan agreement, which is unstructured text, is fed through a model that has been trained previously on past agreements. It is able to assign labels or tags to sections of data. In this example, the tags are loan agreement date, the parties involved, the loan amount, location of the parties, and so on and so forth. Note that this is equally applicable to any other unstructured text, like a clinician note in the healthcare domain, for example. The only difference there would be that the labels would be treatment, symptoms, prescription, diagnosis, and such. So in either case, it's about converting unstructured text to structured data. To the left, I have got a bit of trivia where in a recent competition called LawGeeks, AI outperformed humans in reading a contract. When humans took 92 minutes on the average with 85% accuracy, AI did it in 26 seconds with 94% accuracy. Chatbots. Chatbots have become quite popular for support. However, it has still not taken off as a preferred method of customer interaction because of certain limitations. That probably will change in the near future with advancements in conversational AI. On the left, I have the block schematic of the open source RASA engine, where you have basically 2 neural networks handling the conversation. The first one would derive the intent and the entities in every sentence that the user speaks. In this example, the intent is to search for a provider, and the entities are the hospital and the location. The second one is a recurrent neural network that not only takes the current state, but also the previous states to come up with the most optimal response to send to the user. So this is so that the chatbot does not lose control of the main purpose of the conversation and hence need to always remember the context. And to the right, I have a picture of a Twitter account belonging to Tay, an AI chatbot that Microsoft released back in 2016 for barely 24 hours before it was shut down. What happened there was that the chatbot was a social bot and was programmed to be constantly trained with data that gets generated from its social interactions with people. Unfortunately, it was trained with all sorts of hate messages that it went from humans are super cool type of messages to full Nazi with messages like, I just hate everybody, I hate feminists, and so on and so forth. So the key here, yeah, I'm almost done. The key here is that the AI algorithms are only as good as the data you feed it. This might send a chill down the spines of developers. Pics To Code is a paper put out by Tony Beltramelli of University of Copenhagen, where he built a neural network which took a GUI image and was able to generate the HTML code for that GUI image. Apparently, he first trained the model with thousands of samples, where each sample consisted of a web page design and a sequence of HTML tokens. The output of the sample would be the subsequent token in the code. So for example, if the input is HTML followed by the body tag, the output would be the tag next to the body tag, which could be a div or a table. So the next sample would take this output as the input and so on and so forth. That's how he builds a sample for the training of the model. And once trained, the model can spit out the HTML code given any Adobe Photoshop generated image of a web page. This is my last slide, which is on spatial computing. Spatial computing is poised to invade our spaces in the near future. We are no longer going to be limited by the display screens of your laptop, but the entire 3D space around you is going to be at your disposal. And your mouse will give way to your fingers, your palms, hands, and legs. So at the top left is a demo of how 3D widgets in your space might look like. Instead of clicking a button on a web page, you could literally push a button. Instead of clicking and dragging a slider on a web page, you would literally pinch and drag a slider. The cool thing here is that you can have several such virtual spaces saved as part of your daily work, which you can hop in and out. And when you do that, you can have your favorite applications follow you, just like in the second image, where you see the Microsoft Teams application following around the lady when she hops into different virtual spaces. The third image is a virtual discussion room where you can see one of the team members having teleported himself into the room from his remote location and interacting with the other members of the team. All you need is a couple of selfies to create a 3D model of yourselves to teleport to different virtual spaces. And last, you have the digital twin. Digital twins are digital replicas of an entity. It could be a product, it could be a building, it could be a human being. It displays vital information about the entity as well as is capable of interacting with that. In the picture is a conveyor belt which has a camera that detects banned objects like a gun and stops the belt. The digital twin on the tablet shows the running animation to represent the moving belt and which stops when the actual conveyor belt stops, and you can click on the digital twin to restart the belt. By the way, a company named Willow has a software that with the help of Azure digital twin technology is capable of creating a digital twin for a building where you can go into every floor and every room and look at the AC ducts, the lighting, the heating, and so on and so forth. So with that, I conclude. I leave you with these quotes. The first one is Jim Key's CEO of Blockbuster in 2008. Netflix is not even on the radar screen in terms of competition. And in 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy and Netflix took off. And its revenue in 2019 was 20 billion. Second quote, by 2030, there will be two types of companies, those who use AI-related technologies and those who are out of business. Companies have to race to build AI or else they would be made uncompetitive by Elon Musk. And augmented reality promises to be as influential to the society as a smartphone from Tim Cook. And big data is the foundation of all the mega trends from social to mobile to cloud to gaming by Chris Lynch. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anil, for setting the tone for the rest of the this particular session. I'm sure people may have questions or comments, so please place these in the YouTube or in the Zoom chat. We'll be moving it from YouTube to Zoom so that the panelists can see them. And at this point, I'd like to invite Varghese to speak for the next 10 minutes. Over to you, Varghese.
Thanks, Satish, and thanks, Anil, for the wonderful kind of a flashback or a flash forward. Can you hear me?
I think your internet is a little bit, unstable. Would you want to turn off your video for a short time?
Yeah. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Anil, and for the flashback and the flash forward. I feel like a person who receives the office memo and misses the most important part of it, which was the 10-minute speech. So I was thinking of talking for only about 2 to 3 minutes on the topic. But having said that, the other problem that I ran into was most of what I wanted to say was kind of alluded to by Anil. But I will still try and touch upon some of the things that are relevant and important and continue to be relevant and important. So it would be amiss if I don't touch upon the pandemic that has made us, have this panel virtually instead of probably sitting together in a room and in a conference room and having it. Our CEO, in our recent summit, went on to say that the best Chief Digital Officer Award for 2020 should be given to COVID, because what COVID has done is essentially fast forward the use of technology across any domain, any industry that you can think of. People who are putting it at the back burner of their strategy has now pushed everything up front because now technology is front and center. of everything that they do. And like Anil pointed out, I think when we take a look at some of the newest areas, especially if, look at AI and ML and data that he was referring to, that was what I wanted to cover first. Data, the way that we understand it is gone, right? When we started programming way back, data was only structured. It was DBase, FoxPro in those days. But today, if you take data, structured data is becoming more and more a very small percentage of the total data that is available, especially within enterprise. Voice, image, text, and video are all becoming data that needs to be accessed, stored, and then processed. Now, Anil made a very valid point there in that the way this data needs to be stored, retrieved, and processed is a fundamentally different element of technology that needs to be rethought from scratch. Because our databases were not built for this. So that's one element that becomes a major change. So while Anil was talking about the data that we need to process in 10 years from now being 100x, that data will possibly include voice, images, video, and whatnot. So the technologies that access this data, store this data, process this data is evolving like anything. If you just go to Apache and check all the different projects around data, you will be caught short. Meaning it's impossible to keep track of all of these technologies and all of these products that are being created. By the time you think you have a handle on one, that has moved on, evolved, and then you're back to square one because you're starting from scratch all over again, right? And that's the ground reality in this data space. Now, if you take a look at IoT, right? IoT has created a completely new set of data, right? The streaming data, where data is now streamed, whether it's temperature, pressure, whether it's other parameters, whatever be it, right? Now, this streaming data, especially with the advent of 5G, is only going to increase because the number of devices that are going to be deployed is almost going to increase. I would say, about 1,000x, or probably even 10,000x. I don't think we have even hit the tip of the iceberg in that. Now, obviously, this increases the need to store the data, process the data. And that's where, to me, the edge is going to become more and more important. Because not only are we going to see data being stored at the edge, but obviously data being processed at the edge. One of the projects that we worked on was a solution where we actually trained the data on the cloud, but we actually deployed it on the edge. And this is a fairly rudimentary edge. And this is one area that we will certainly see improving tremendously, because that's where the action is going to be. Why would you want to take all of this data and put it into a centralized server when you want to quickly use the data for any decisions, right, at the edge itself? And this is more so, and referred to as autonomous cars. We're going to see a tremendous amount of this in that space. Now, the other element that we all talk about is AI and ML, right? Now, fundamentally, the data is one of the most critical elements of this area, right? And I'll alluded to a lot to it, so I'm not going to refer to it more than that. But at the end of the day, right, two things that he said is critical, right? One is, what is this data? How do we use it? How do we train the models? How do we test the models? And that's evolving. If you take a look at the algorithms, they haven't changed fundamentally. But what has become more and more a reality is that these algorithms are fundamentally changing or evolving for very specific use cases. And that's what's happening, right? So efficacy of these algorithms are becoming more and more tuned to very specific use cases. And that's a very interesting area to be in. We call it the Uberization of algorithms, right? Because it's all out there. It's how you take it and use it that actually makes a difference. But again, this whole space, like Anil was talking about, is again becoming a big challenge from multiple perspectives, right? And therefore, I was at the MIT last year when they were talking about two areas that they see distinctly happening, right? Which is explainable AI and ethical AI. And explainable AI is essential in the insurance industry or the finance industry, because when you're using AI and ML or AI to essentially decide an outcome that has potential financial impact, you better be able to go back to justify how you got that outcome. And that's crucial, because if somebody is going to file a legal case, then it becomes extremely important, right? So you cannot attribute a bad investment decision to a AI engine. You have to actually point it back to an algorithm or a data scientist who unfortunately or fortunately built that model, right? And that's a whole stream that's evolving. The second is ethical AI, and again alluded to it. But that is again so fundamental, because when we train our models, what data that we use to train the models becomes a very critical element of that training. And then the testing piece of it. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware, but there's a huge storm brewing right now, because one of the leading ethical AI activists, who was also part of Google, was essentially fired by Google for whatever reasons that has not been made public. And the whole Google community, the Googlers are up in arms, the academia is up in arms, and a lot of researchers are also up in arms. So people are taking this very seriously, right? Now you extend that to decisioning in autonomous cars, self-driven cars, right? Self-driven trucks. Now suddenly you understand the need to ensure that there is a very ethical element to how this data is used, what data is used to train, to test, and therefore how you put it out for decisions.
2 minutes.
Now, having said all of this, right, the whole legal element, right, data privacy is just one of them, right? You would have heard of GDPR. CCPA used to be the California law. Now it's CPRA, which has just come out. Even in India, now data privacy is critical. It's actually seen as a fundamental right. So that is one area that is increasingly going to become a very critical element of how data is stored, retrieved, and processed. And Anil made the statement about the right to be forgotten. It's a very easy thing to say, but a very difficult thing to do within an enterprise. Imagine the number of sources of truth. Everybody would like to have a single source of truth, but every enterprise is full of these silos of data that are sources of truths. So getting data out of all of them, or even understanding where my data is present itself, is a very critical element. Forget trying to get rid of it. Now, imagine that, look at the healthcare industry. You have PHI and HIPAA rules. Look at the financial industry. You have PCI and PII data, right? So every industry is coming up more and more with these regulations around standards, around what we call as guidelines and guide wires that have to be used. Now, again, the last part that I wanted to talk about was the fact that all of these things that are deployed, whether it's wearables, our mobile devices, our laptops, forget all of that. All the microservices endpoints that microservices architectures create increases the attack vectors tremendously, right? Cybersecurity is critical, but like Anil was mentioning, it is post the fact. So the onus is on us developers to really look at how do we write secure code, right? What are we going to use to validate and verify whether we've written it well? right? And then how do we test it? To what level do we go to test it? Can I have automatic threat
1 minute,
modeling?
Varghese.
Yeah, sure. Do we have automatic threat modeling? Because I don't want to keep testing a product forever, right? I want to make sure that I contain my testing, and the only way I can do that is probably by modeling my threats. So in short, what I was essentially looking at was the whole data, AI, ML, 5G and IoT, and security with a touch of legal and compliance aspect. But the critical element that I wanted to convey was, the way that we see data, the way that we are processing data, the way that data used to reside in applications is long gone. And that is changing. What we need to process is also going to change. So as developers, this is an area where it's great to get in, but it's going to be full of frustration because every day there's a new product coming. But it'll be a very interesting journey for sure. And that's the journey that I call all of the technologists to get into. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Varghese. Indeed, these are the kind of very precisely the most important challenges that we are facing as a community. And we need to, as you say, come out with some solutions, shared practices, best practices that we can kind of use to strengthen ourselves. With that, we would like to move over to Brandon now. Brandon, over to you for your perspectives on this.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Satish and Anil and Varghese. So two of the themes or topics that I've been focused on most recently are containerization and scale. And so with scale and with containerization, I know, Anil, you've hit upon this, and Varghese did as well, is the idea of microservices. And that transition between or from the monolithic legacy application to the microservice is something that I think is a big shift that isn't because of the pandemic, but I think has developed in parallel, and it's been a part of a design paradigm change that allows us to meet the scale. And that, to me, has been one of the bigger things, is that now that almost every service is moving online, so the amount and the depth of data, the security of that data, and the ability to handle massive adoption from global user bases is something that in conjunction with AWS and the architectures and Azure and everything else, our data that we're collecting and our applications that we're writing, all of that has changed. And the way that we organize our thought processes, our designs, our architectures, our deployments, all of that is changing. And it's moving rapidly towards the breakdown of the old monolith. And I think that that is a good thing, is something that I know even in our current, where the current solution and project that we're working on, we're taking an old application that is a monolithic application and moving it towards something that is microservices based, is containerized. And part of this is because we and others too need to be able to adapt to times when volume and the requests are at peak levels and times when there are not a massive amount of requests and volume. And so for services that have times of the year where things are in need, then this ability to auto scale, this ability to containerize, and to put your logic into very specific services has given us and given a lot of other companies the ability to scale tremendously that I don't think prior to this kind of architectural design shift would have been possible. I was talking to a group yesterday, which is an open source project called Orthelius. And that's been rolled into a company called Deploy Hub. And so they're idea is, how do we catalog, organize, and version our microservices, and the interdependencies and the coupling or decoupling of those microservices. And part of their group is Netflix and Google. And so as a part of that, the idea is that somebody like a Netflix has 5,000 microservices to manage and to scale. And so how do you, as a company, even as big as Netflix is, how do you manage the interdependencies and the deprecation or the rollout of new microservices when you have 5,000 of them to manage? And so these ideas about, well, now let's think about just logically, how do we roll these up? We've gone away from, here's my API and here's my interface, and so this is my application, where now the application is potentially just some interface that's interacting with an overall ecosystem, with an overall environment. And how do we contextualize that? How do we think about it? How do we wrap nomenclature around that? And so the idea of microservices being rolled up to another level, which is a component, and that components are composed of several different microservices, each of which may have interdependencies. They may not. They may be coupled. They may be decoupled. But the idea in the kind of logical architectural perspective that says, this is how I'm going to organize and track and catalog and version these, I think is something that is a shift and is something that is needed. But it's also, I think, something that has allowed us and other companies to be able to scale to meet challenges presented by something like the pandemic, right? Prior to this, I don't know if all of the services that are now online, right? Everything from the food I order to the stocks that I trade to my medical history and insurance claims and my kids' schoolwork, all of that is now some service that I can access online, right? And so everyone in that space or doing something like this has had to transition in some capacity from older application architecture models to something that can scale to meet this kind of usage and this kind of growth. And so for me, that's been kind of the biggest change and shift in what we've been focused on the most. And to go along with that is then now we figure out how we organize and how we catalog and how we break down our old monoliths into microservices, but then how do we deploy them, right? And so that's where something like, and this is current project is something that is the first time that we'll be working with this, and it's things like Kubernetes, so moving into containerization along with auto scaling that says, I've got my architecture is broken down and my services are broken down logically now and have distinct separation between them. But how do I put those into a container, right? How do I put them into something that is preloaded with dependencies that can be auto scaled on demand? And so this change to containerization, along with the development of technologies like Kubernetes, I think is one of the other major supporting factors that helps us and helps other companies grow and meet this, again, kind of usage and growth demand that has just been crazy during COVID. And one of the examples, I think, and I saw this yesterday because DoorDash is about to IPO, right? And I think the coming weeks. And so, their usage and consumption of their services in the 9 months ended September 30th this year, DoorDash had revenues of roughly $2 billion, where in the same window in 2019, it was 500 million. So, I mean, this is an incredible increase for consumption and usage and processing of 900 million different orders, right? And so just that massive, and they're just one example, right? And so this massive scale user base growth has to be supported by something. And so again,
2 minutes more.
Okay, and so again, for me, just the ideas of microservices, the breakdown of older traditional monolithic style applications, and then the ability to deploy those through technologies like Kubernetes and containerization. That, to me, is something that wasn't because of the pandemic, but I think was very serendipitous that the technologies were developed prior to and have continued to grow and be developed further with with our current environment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brandon. Indeed, from an architectural perspective, microservices and containerization has been the most significant change in the recent past, I think, moving away from even a multi-tier architecture to a truly distributed, scalable, flexible kind of a microservices-oriented structure. That is indeed been a most significant change, and hopefully that will fortify us for meeting some of our challenges as we go forward. So thank you very much for that. We now move on to Manjula, and we will listen to her perspectives. Over to you, Manjula.
Thank you, Satish. Good evening, afternoon, and morning for people who are joining from various time zones. First of all, congratulations to INApp for completing 20 glorious years. That's a tremendous milestone. And I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to this session. I just want to start off saying that when I started my career about 30 years ago, things weren't this complex. I just had to write some COBOL code, JCLs on mainframe, or some C code on Unix system. Today, the world runs on technology. And I come from an organization where our vision is to be part of every single transaction in the world. This is not something that people usually talk about, tax and technology. So let me just give you a brief intro about tax, how complex it is, and how is technology helping to manage the complex world of tax. I believe Benjamin Franklin said this: nothing is certain but death and taxes. And we are in the business of tax compliance. Usually people ask this question, when do you think taxes started? And the answer is that it's not long after the beginning of civilization. So a history of taxation, therefore, reads almost like a history of society and culture in general. The first record of organized taxation came from Egypt around 3000 BC and is mentioned in numerous historical sources, including the Bible. So we are in a business which is centuries old and really complex. So let me just throw a bit in terms of how complex this world is, and then I'll try to look at how technology helps this domain. So the usual question that we ask most of the people in our sessions are, how many different ways do you think an orange juice is taxed in US? We get various answers, to 5 to 7. But in reality, the answer is more than 70 ways, 70. So the process of taxation is an extremely complex one, and hence technology. So if I really look into I do a peek into the process of taxation, it starts with the classification of the product, or services out of thousands of categories as per the rules of the country or countries involved. Sometimes it can become extremely complex in countries where local tax laws vary at a local level, like counties, jurisdictions, states. And as per the classification of the product or service, they have the ability to identify the tax rate in case the transaction is taxable, or it is an exemption, or it is not exempted, right? The process does not stop there. In many countries, there might be a need for a compliance document. In India, we have something called as e-way bills. If the sale is between two countries, then there are various validations that needs to be done, and the transactional data that needs to be validated, like HS code verification, calculation of import tax, and custom duties. In a nutshell, you cannot manage the entire process of taxation manually. So that's where the first process of automation comes into picture in terms of determining the taxability, identifying tax rates, collecting taxes, preparing and filling tax returns, and so on and so forth. Now you imagine how difficult it is to be able to keep up with the entire world's taxation rules and regulation. These rules keep changing frequently and are not consistent across taxing jurisdiction. Just to give you a hint, United States alone has 12,000 plus tax jurisdictions. And there are further complications that arise from thousands of rule change that are enacted every year as taxing authorities amend their tax rates and taxability rules. Modify jurisdictional boundaries. You stand here one day and the next day you could be on a different jurisdiction altogether, right? And also implement other regulatory changes. So taxes can vary because of temporary tax incentives that change the tax rate for specific products for a specific time or even transaction threshold. So that's a very complex process of determining the taxability. Now, how does technology help us? I heard quite a lot of examples that were being talked about for real life scenarios. And here is how, I want to connect the technology to how it helps the tax domain. I don't know how many of you have been following some news, especially people in India, about a significant fraud that have been detected from a GST point of view. Recently, the government declared that they've detected a GST fraud to the tune of 100 plus crores. And there was another one that talked about someone creating fake invoices to the tune of 30 crores. And then another one for claiming input tax credit for fake companies, right? These have all been published to very clearly say that there is a mechanism in place now by the government to detect fraud. And how do they do it? They use real-time analytics to track GST fraud. And if you really look at how the biggest change in the GST regime in India, the e-invoicing has been rolled out, a lot of it has been done using real-time and data analytics. So it played a significant part in terms of the decision-making process of the revenue thresholds. So that's something which is absolutely new, and we are looking forward to how this is going to play a role in terms of the taxation technology in future. And we're sure that for governments, tax data analytics can help improve both the tax collection and also improve risk scoring process. It can actually do this by way of advanced analytics that operates on, richer, wider set of data that wasn't possible before. On the business side, data analytics can help with ensuring compliance, reporting, and ensuring that they have a source of single truth regarding their tax compliance, improve auditability, and ensure they are not overpaying. And when I come to talk about the new age technologies in the world of tax, I want to touch upon AI, ML, and natural language processing has been of use, right? AI's key benefits for taxation can be summarized in 3 or 4 bullet points. Allows people to do increased automation, speed, accuracy of the data for tax purposes. Intelligent assistance in performing, repeated tasks on mostly structured data like item classification, HS code verification, tax rate determination, and calculation. These are all extremely useful benefits from an AI point of view. Tax authorities are also now looking at building our own regulated invoicing systems, to obtain transaction level data automatically. And they're requesting it more on a real-time basis. So with this data, you can carry out data analytics testing to then determine whether the business is complying, and if not, by how much. They do not need tax advisors for this, certainly not as much as before. If you talk about tax information, in most countries, the tax information, it gets published as extensive information to help businesses comply, whether in the form of legislation, rulings, interpretations, guidance materials, etc. So a lot of businesses providing tax solutions have developed chatbots to handle most routine queries, which were earlier handled by a tax professional. In short, understanding tax obligations require less labor or input from tax professionals. So again, conversational chatbots that can help customers based on the context of the conversation is now a powerful tool. If I talk about cloud-based apps, because that's something, pay as you go coming up really significant in the world of tax, right? The fact that switching the tax and accounting function to a cloud-based system offers flexibility along with improved risk mitigation as one of the reasons why they are recommended in the business of tax.
2 minutes.
Right. The tax and accounting function of many businesses is known to be the last one to undergo any digital transformation usually. However, if you really look at the COVID situation, the lockdown due to COVID-19 overnight has changed the way chartered accountants were fulfilling compliance obligations, including GST returns and GST audits, right? Organizations like Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, National Professional Accounting Body of India, are even recommending the use of cloud-based compliance technology solutions to its members now. With that, I am going to stop and say that, a field where technology was not really relevant, it was completely driven by, manual work at this point of time, is in the verge of getting transformed completely using technology and using the latest and the greatest of technologies. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what more gets brought into this, this particular area. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manjula. That was fascinating. I never realized taxation was so complex. Given the fact that taxes drive the government and government drives the nation, this is indeed a very important part of our life. Although we may not like it so much, but it is very, very good to know that there is so much of progress happening and post-COVID changes. Thanks again. We now move over to Ray, who's going to talk to us about his perspectives on these topics. Over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Satish. And thank you all for having me for your 20th anniversary. It's really phenomenal that I've known you guys for almost 20 years now, especially InApp. And it's amazing that, 20 years later, we're still in contact. I don't know whether I have anything else to add than what everybody else has been talking about from a technology point of view. But I do want to mention is that my role is completely tied to what we are looking for in terms of innovation, technology, which is automation, efficiency gains. Essentially, that is essentially the impetus for everything that we do, right? If I look back in 2017, 2018, we were looking at AR, VR as potential areas that we could expand in for my own company. And at that point in time, we didn't realize that this is going to become a new normal, especially with COVID, where remote access to different building spaces or even actually collaborating across different geographical regions will become a key essential requirement for this adoption of new technologies. We are increasingly looking at AI as automating several parts of our processes. And that is another area that, when we looked at kicked off the project for AI 2 years ago, we did not realize that this is going to become a key factor in differentiation, competitive differentiation with other companies. Now, in June, I think McKinsey actually had come out with an article called Innovation in a Crisis. It's a really fascinating article because they actually did an analysis of public companies that invested in innovation, during the downturn and how they fared during the upturn. So meaning that right now what we are seeing with COVID is essentially a slowdown of economy. And the companies that invest in new technologies and new automations, what they did is that the analysis clearly showed that the public companies that invested in innovation and were much more aggressive with investing in automation and new technologies fared a lot better, almost 30% plus better than the companies that did not. A lot of companies are actually doing that right now, which is not necessarily focused on innovation, but hunkering down and focusing on survival, right? And that's essentially what the differentiation is, that the companies that are looking at new technologies, like all the things that Anil talked about and all the things that other panelists talked about, AI, ML, IoT, all those things are actually changing, transforming the industry. And my current company, Gordian, is in the construction space. And just so you know, construction is dead last when it comes to technology adoption. But over the last 5 years, I'm having a tough time actually catching up with all the new things that are coming about, from robotics to IoT and AR, VR in place. Digital twins, like Anil talked about, those are areas that there's an explosion of innovation. And part of it is also brought about by the COVID, There was another article in Forbes that interviewed AI founders, 50 of AI founders. And one of the founders actually said that he has seen, in the last 2 months, he has seen more innovation and adoption of new technologies in the last 2 years compared to the last 2 years. That is phenomenal. There is a downside to COVID. Yes, there is, this pandemic is actually disrupting everybody, but it is also actually forcing us to think of different ways how we interact. And that essentially is, if you look at every downturn that happened from an economy point of view, that was essentially the driving factor. And, in some ways, we are fortunate that we are actually forced to innovate because we are looking at new technologies as a way to, improve efficiencies and improve all the work that we do on a daily basis. So from my side, from a technology adoption point of view, I've actually been involved with natural language processing and AI for almost 20 years. And that is something that what I can say is that changed is AI as a technology is becoming more commoditized. I remember 20 years ago, downloading Solr, which is a search engine from Stanford, and having to actually write code to make it all work together with all the things that we were doing. Today, I don't have to do that. There is so much of technology that is available and open source technology that's available that I can literally plug and play a fairly complex search engine and all the products that we build. Or I can go out and actually get a commercial product very, very quickly and rapidly deploy. And years ago when I used Solr, it took us several months to actually make it all work. And it took quite a bit of configuration to even get it to work within our domain. All that is also changing. Data is becoming an asset. And as such, all these new technologies are becoming commoditized. I'm pretty sure that in a few years down the line, very similar to what Anil's example of HTML code generation, you will end up actually having somebody who can generate AI models. All you have to do is to actually give it a few data points and it'll actually generate what you need. And all that is changing how what we have in terms of skills. Right? So you have a data scientist and you have a data analyst. And all that is actually changing because all these new technologies that are available for us. Customer churn used to be a fairly complex process for you to actually analyze and predict. Now you can just go out and buy a software that has an AI and ML component built into it, tweak it, configure it to your needs, and within a month or so, you have it up and running. Right? All that is, is only possible because of the rapid progress that we're making with technology. Even when you look at it from the cloud service providers like Azure and AWS, they are packaging new features rapidly. Azure has a digital twin as a package that you can actually add to your cloud platform. Quickly, you can deploy it and get it to work, test it out, and within a very short time, you can actually deploy a working solution. That wasn't possible, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So that is something that, it's phenomenal to see all this plug and play kind of approach that we have for all these new technologies. And we are taking advantage of it. And that is essentially what we are doing at my company is that this innovation that we are doing is all about actually pulling in all these different pieces and, almost like we call what I would call it as screwdriver technology. We are bringing it all together, putting it all together, assembling it, packaging it, and then this becomes our product, and we are improving efficiencies. And that speed at which that we are doing it is phenomenal. And that is something that I'm really fortunate to be in, at least in this time and space, despite the pandemic, that I get to actually play with all these different cool technologies and actually improve our customers' day-to-day operations. With that, Satish, back to you.
Thanks very much, Ray. That was also fascinating because the fact that we are moving towards kind of build your own solution by assembling these blocks, what you said as screwdriver technology, and that it's effective as of today, that's quite amazing actually, because we wouldn't have thought of, in fact, some companies might have to change their revenue models because they are depending on, kind of doing this assembling. But if the end users can do it themselves, then they are in trouble. So thanks for that, that very interesting intervention. We will now move over to some of the questions which have been raised. So the questions, we have 3 or 4 questions, and I think, have just enough time for that. I'll read out the first question, and in fact, it is pretty much on the lines of what Ray was talking about towards the end, that the companies, how they're forced to kind of innovate. The first question is from Maria, and she says, it was mentioned in the discussion that by 2030 there would be 2 types of companies: those who use AI technologies and who are out of business. What do you think are the strategies companies should start adopting without any delay in order to survive and grow in the situation? In other words, what should companies do, or what kind of companies are able to kind of adopt and innovate and be more resilient given the situation? The question is open to any panelist.
That statement actually was in my slide, one of my slides.
Oh,
and
yeah. Okay.
I don't know whether it is it was supposedly in an article that was I think it was Elon Musk who made this statement. So you can't really say that any statement that you find by searching on the internet is fake or not. So I don't take the responsibility for that. But I think what he intended by that statement is that just like Ray said, many applications are incorporating AI inside their applications. Like, for example, Gmail, we use Gmail every day. So how many AI functionality do you come across? So we are almost taking it for granted that these are like the norm. Like sorting the emails and the autofilling, all those things are AI technology. So I think what is meant by that is that companies should start thinking and incorporating better ways to do things using AI technologies if it's a relevant thing. For example, the other day we were actually looking at a scraping technology where normally you scrape using XPaths, but to sometimes when the website changes, the XPaths have to change and things don't work. Then you got to go back and figure out what's the right XPath and then change it. So that's the way we have been working so far for scraping content from websites. But there is an AI alternative, which is what we are trying to research on. And I'm pretty sure that we'll come out with a solution that will work, without having to, rework the code like the old way. So like that, I think many of these would have, many of these applications of AI, you may have to incorporate in your applications. That's the only way you can stay afloat in terms of competition. Yeah.
Thanks, Anil. Anyone else would like to make a brief intervention about this?
I'll just add to it. I think the key is understanding the pain points where you can apply AI, right? And that's very critical. It's about understanding the business problem and looking at what solves it, whether it's a code level solution or whether it needs a cognition ability to solve it. And that's typically where you can start applying AI. And I think that's becoming more and more the norm. I think Manjula talked about tax forms. I think Anil himself showed an example of a contract. I think that's almost becoming a norm, right? What the human being can do, and you multiply it using AI. I think that's where we can really start applying. And it all starts from the pain point. I think the more pain points you can identify, we can apply it, the faster you can apply.
Right. Thanks, Varghese, for that. Would anybody else like to make any other comment? Since Anil mentioned Gmail, I was reading the other day that in 2017, Gmail innovated and brought out this auto response or auto reply. Now they were giving it for some users to test it out one day, and then by flipping a switch, it is made available to 1+ billion people. That is incredible kind of scaling of AI technology, and that's what even relating to taxes also. India is a huge country, and we cannot progress until we have our taxation in order. So the use of these technologies, I'm sure, will kind of bring about this kind of change. Before I go to the next question, does anybody else want to make any comment? Okay, Let's move to the next question. The next question from Vipin. As the cloud grows, open source communities are getting bigger, and even giants like Microsoft started to contribute. Still, using these sources could end up in a security breach. What should be the rule of thumb for any organization selecting an open source who says data is to be more secure? So suppose a company wants its data to be secure. The question is if the open source tools have any weaknesses in the protection of data. Usually, I would say it's a kind of, it is not true to say that because the source code is open that it's not secure, but I defer to the experts here who might want to comment on the security of open source programs.
Satish, I think you're probably the best person to answer that question.
That is very true, but I still would like to hear from the experts here, and I'd rather not kind of. So, would anybody like to? I don't see anybody volunteering.
Yeah, just say briefly that.
Yes.
I mean, the idea that the code is open, again, doesn't just imply that it's not secure, but the idea of a community participating in that code and bringing in all of the different viewpoints and ideas from a larger perspective and a larger community, to me, almost makes the code more secure. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it just, having that community-based aspect to it, to me, just enhances the software and the security.
I think the overall security is like it's shared. Like I mentioned in my presentation, like you have the infrastructure provider providing you some security. You have the code that is providing you some security. So you have to do your due diligence, and you have to incorporate all the best practices in your application. So if you're using some open source software, then you got to ensure that that software also incorporates the best practices for security, for making it secure. So I think that's a given, that any open source software that you incorporate into yours, you have to ensure the security, that it follows all the security protocols and things like that.
Right. Thanks, Anil. Ray, would you like to add to this?
Sure. So somebody actually, I was talking to somebody a few months ago, and they mentioned this analogy, which makes sense, right? Let us say that you have a car, which is an open source, and you have a house, and you park the car in the garage. The car can be completely unlocked, but as long as you make sure that your house is actually secure, then you're actually containing that software risk itself in terms of security, if there is one, right? And the other point that he was also making is that the open source community actually has taken off quite a bit in terms of their desire to actually produce good code. I mean, the people who actually spend their time, they give their own personal time to actually build the code, are much more focused on the actual solution, not necessarily in throwing in some random code that could potentially lead to security issues. So that is something that at least his experience has been that the community, the open source community, has been very diligent about it. And also, specifically when you look at this large companies like Microsoft contributing to open source, they actually spend quite a bit of time and resources in ensuring that security, at least any kind of security holes, are either plugged or actually eliminated at all before they even publish that out into the open source community, because it's a matter of prestige for a lot of these companies.
I think he's referring to the .NET Core that was open sourced recently. So,
yeah. So this issue of the last point that Ray mentioned about the prestige angle, where I put my code out in my name, and any bug there is a direct problem for me. So as opposed to teams working behind walls, in the company walls, where their names are not mentioned, it is coming out as a company's product and not as. Like if I'm an open source programmer, I'm proud of my code. So that's one aspect, definitely, that motivation. Second is also the point that Brendan was mentioning about the community. The community is extremely important, and the Linus's law says that if you have enough eyeballs or bugs are shallow, which basically means that if you have enough community members to review the code would be secure. However, there have been some failures. For example, the last one was the OpenSSL, which turned out to have a long-standing bug in it. which worried a lot of people because that is used by many libraries in turn. And that happened because that community was underfunded. It was under-resourced, meaning the number of people who were supporting this review was much less. And that has given some insights to open source communities how not to do things also. But in general, I completely agree with the points raised. Now, the next question, I jump to a tax-related question so that Manjula can answer that, and then we'll come back to the other questions. This question is interesting because it says that the government already has all our data. Then why should we file taxes at all? Can't the government, simply calculate the data, the tax based on the data that it already has on all of us, because it is surveilling on all of us? I'm not sure that whether it's factually correct, but over to you, Manjula.
Yep. So, the question, says that the taxation has been part of all governments for centuries, right? The reason government is currently doing, let me just give you an example of what the government in India is doing to really explain where tax automation helps and what government is doing to automate and rather take everything, from a manual point of view and keeping the data accurate. So today, if you really look at India, it's been 3 years from 2017, July 1st, when the government announced GST. As of October 1st, every single invoice that has been generated B2B transactions for companies with a revenue above 500 crores, about $68 million US, are actually registered with the government through e-invoices. So the government actually gets the invoices on a real-time basis, which wasn't the case earlier because the companies had to file them manually, give the data, and then comes the audit and the long process of verifying that manually. Come 1st of January, every company that's above 100 crores in revenue, $13 million and above, will be filing e-invoices on all B2B transactions. And hopefully by 1st of April, all the B2C transactions of everything above 100 crores will also be real time on 1st of April. With that, the government wouldn't require organizations. They will reach a state where at some point of time in future, they've already announced it that you wouldn't have to file your monthly returns or your annual returns because the data is already available with the government in the format that they want. And that's what a lot of countries are going forward with. Brazil is one such country which has gone ahead with e-invoicing much, much before India has done. So the movement, the way the government is actually looking at it today is to really move into a situation where people don't need to file tax returns from an indirect tax point of view because the data is going to be available, which wasn't really the case. It was too much of data, not in necessarily the way it should have been automated. So we would see that happening in future. And I hope that explains from an automation point of view.
Thank you very much, Manjula. I have a supplementary question. Now, our departments, like the tax department, are government departments with their own strengths and weaknesses. Now, when they start adopting IT at this scale, do they really have, kind of inherent, is IT in their DNA? Meaning, do they have the competence to kind of really carry this through?
Not, okay, I may, I don't know whether I should be quoted or not on this, but let me just tell you what my experience has been in the last 3 years, right? We've seen so many changes in India from a taxation automation point of view, especially on the indirect tax, right? We've seen so many changes. So, as late as last week, we had seen an API change that's happening, which actually, we had to go through and change a lot of our code to make sure that we're catering to that, right? So it has not been, the best of the journey, but I think slowly we are reaching there. The team that's actually today working on the GST team is one of, a high-end technology team that has actually proved to come out with such simplified ways of getting GST done. So from where we started 3 years back to look at it today, yes, it was a rough journey, but we're seeing a significant improvement. So there have been ups and downs. There are still SOPs that are the old style SOPs, which still need to be followed. But the government is really, really open, and the GST network is really open in terms of accepting the feedback, and there are changes coming. So I see this going in the right way at this point of time.
Right. Thanks very much. That sounds very interesting. Very counterintuitive, actually, but interesting. We have another question on edge computing, but I'm not sure whether we have the time to do justice to that question. There's another question from Bijoy Krishnan, which is perhaps simpler to answer. Will the technologies such as AI, ML, and other bot technologies adversely affect employment? So does anybody want to comment on this potentially sensitive issue in India?
Let me take it up. So I was in a panel discussion with NASSCOM and PMI last Friday on this whole concept of the citizen developer and how low code, no code is becoming a reality, especially with cloud providers creating their own set of low code, no code platforms, app sheets, or I think Honeycode. Microsoft has its Power Platform and whatnot. And the conversation was about the fact that in the next 10 years, there's going to be almost a 4x, 5x growth in that industry. Now, if you take all the jobs that AI throws out, and if you have a mechanism to train all of them in low code, no code, then we probably have more than sufficient people or sufficient jobs, I would say. Because there was another statistics that was read out, which was that there would be a shortage of nearly, I think about 2 million developers in the low code, no code space, just in US alone. So that is probably going to be a huge opportunity. So while one industry throws out automation and maybe reduces the opportunities for job, there's probably enough tools getting created on the other side for jobs to get created, would be my thought.
Thanks, Verghese. Yeah, this is what we have seen in the earlier iterations of technologies as well. This is probably, we have to, of course, be prepared with the kind of safety nets to ensure that, the most vulnerable people are looked after. But I assume that this is not a permanent problem.
Also, I believe a lot of low code, no code platforms have come and gone as well. So we never know, what the future holds, because all this whole spatial computing, that will actually throw its own questions. Like basically, none of these low code platforms would probably work in the spatial computing space because you need different skills, you need 3D models and all that. So then it's actually a whole new ball game, as opposed to the Microsoft Power Apps type of stuff. So
right. So it is possible that the very high-end work cannot be done at these kind of levels, but it's also possible that the high-end work is specialized and done by one group, whereas the add-ons and the localization aspects could be done by much more maybe less qualified resource groups.
Right, and I think it's also important that even with people, the young generation becoming more familiar with mobile and type of devices, they'll be more looking for those type of applications, or they'll be more at ease working with spatial applications and things like that, as opposed to the traditional technology, the old technology type of apps. So I think it might be easier to find employees to work in some newer generation of technology as opposed to an older version.
Right. Thanks very much. So now it is time for the closing statements from the panelists. If anyone would like to make a 1-minute closing statement on what you have discussed and what you feel as a message to the participants, please go ahead. Anil, do you want to start?
Yeah, basically, the concluding statement from me would be that in order to cater to the changing business environment, software companies need to adapt quickly to those changes. Like transformation from waterfall to agile methodologies is commonplace now. It has actually put an emphasis on the need to make better product releases quickly, build applications that are a collection of microservices as opposed to the monolith, like Brandon pointed out. Plan to build APIs in your software for increased integration between apps, incorporate automation like CI/CD and so on. So make use of elastic hardware provided by cloud vendors. Make sure such designs are cost effective. and incorporate AI wherever possible and wherever it yields results. And yeah, that's my take.
Thanks, Anil. Varghese, over to you.
Yeah, I have a slightly different, meaning I agree with whatever Anil said, but a slightly different approach to it. You know, when I started coding, if you knew C, you are God, right? You only needed to know that one language, and then you know, if you worked on Unix as well, then you are like a superhero, right? Unfortunately, the world has changed, right? While in the development world, in the natural world, things have become simpler. In the development world, it has become a lot more complex. And whether we like it or not, today, you know, Brian was talking about microservices. If you get into microservices, the amount of technologies you would need to know as a developer is probably mind-boggling for somebody who started coding in the 80s and 90s. And that's in one side it's worrying because the maturity of a developer takes a lot more time than it probably used to years back. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, right? So as budding developers, as potential architects, there is going to be a time for us to understand all of these technologies. Once you learn the basics to a certain extent, then changing becomes faster and easier. But it's still not, you still have to know a lot of stuff, whether we like it or not. And I think that's the ground reality. So learn as much as possible, spend as much time as possible doing coding, doodling, whatever you want to call it. That's the best way to become more proficient. And that helps you to evolve as a developer in this changing world, because technology change is a given. We can't escape that. So that's my one.
Thanks, Varghese. Over to you, Brandon.
So first off, thank you to everybody. And again, congratulations to INApp for the past 20 years. And so to what Varghese was saying, there is a lot to learn, but I think one of the things that is really helpful and goes hand in hand is that we have this vast amount of information that is shared that we can all access, right? So we may need to learn all of these different technologies and these different architectures and styles, but luckily we can Google it and we can find it, right? And we can participate in some community that can help us learn it. And so I would say, just as kind of my closing thought is, microservices and architecture to me are a big change and a big deal, but don't be scared by it. I think this is something that you can go out, you can learn, you can participate in communities, and you can find support and knowledge. So I would say go forth and look for it.
Thanks, Brandon. Over to you, Manjula.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Once again, congratulations on this 20 years, significant milestone. I just have a very small thing to say, though I agree completely with what Varghese has said about there's so much of opportunities to learn. I would ask all your teams to keep looking for areas where you can automate, you can innovate. I think that's where it's going to take us forward. So that's my message to your team.
Thank you, Manjula. Over to you, Ray.
Sorry about that. What I would like to add is that I think, Varghese, you brought it up, which is, especially when you look at AI technologies or any new technologies. I think the fundamental thing is that, what is the question or what is it that you're trying to solve? That is more important than actually how you actually put the solution together. So all I would say is that, between hard skills and soft skills, a lot of emphasis is paid on, at least in the last 20 years or so, the emphasis was more on hard skills. Do you know C programming? Can you actually program efficiently and fast and so on? Understanding and, whatever we call it, is building up your soft skills is from the business side. What is the problem that you're trying to solve is going to become a key factor in success. Because unless and until you know what the problem is, you don't know how to find a solution. And the solutions are becoming much more commoditized, like I said. You're going to have a lot of automation, a lot of libraries that you need to pull together. That is much more important than actually how do you fit all these things together to solve the problem.
Right. Thanks very much, Ray. I apologize for the session having exceeded time by 4 minutes. I'd like to profusely thank all the speakers for their excellent and very engaging, interventions and making this a very active session. We have more questions than what we could answer, but it's been a very great experience having all of you here with us. And thanks very much for your wishes on our 20th anniversary. Had this been a face-to-face event, we would have presented you with a memento. But please stay on the line for a couple of minutes more, and while I ask the MC to take over. Back to you.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you all. Needless to say, it was indeed absolutely informative session, and our panelists have distinctly contributed their comprehensive views on the topic. On behalf of INApp family, I thank all our panelists for being an invaluable part of INApp at 20 celebrations. Thank you all. I also thank Satish, who played an elemental role in coordinating today's panel discussion. Thank you, Satish. I also thank all the viewers for their enthusiastic participation and the entire INApp team for their dedicated effort. Thank you all. As a token of our gratitude, we'd love to present a virtual memento to all our panelists and our moderator. Here we come to the end of this very exciting panel discussion. This is Brigitte signing off. Thank you all.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy 20th celebration.